Hey guys, how's everyone doing? Happy February. It is American Heart Month here in the United States. Every February we celebrate it. Some places celebrate it more than others, right? But in all seriousness, it is really important to highlight the problem of heart disease because it is the number one killer of men and women in the United States. So I wanted to, and I think worldwide, for the most part, in most areas of the world, it is as well. So I was listening to an amazing podcast. I don't know if you guys listen to the Mastering Diabetes podcast, but it is an excellent podcast. And the Cyrus Khambatta, who's a scientist, researcher, PhD, brilliant man, has a great podcast this week on fat specifically, because I don't know if you know, but there's a lot of confusion out there on how much fat we should eat. Is it good to eat fat? Is it bad to eat fat? And as you probably know, I promote a whole food plant-based diet, but fat for some reason is confusing to people, and rightly so. If you do a Google search, you're going to find, eat the ketogenic diet, which is high fat, and then of course proponents of a plant-based diet are like, no, a whole food plant-based diet is better, which is lower fat. So given there's so much contradiction and confusion out there, I just wanted to talk a little bit about fat today. First I wanted to say though, I don't know if any of you guys remember back in the late 80s, early 90s, the U.S. dietary guidelines changed and said saturated fat is bad, it leads to heart disease, we need to actually eat less fat, right, and go on and eat low fat. And I think their intentions were good, right? Their thought process was good, but I don't think they went specific enough to say whole grains, fruits, vegetables, and legumes, right? Those are healthy sources of carbs, right? And what the food industry heard was, okay, let's process a bunch of high carb, high sugar foods and put it out there into the public. And so you probably have seen them, right? It says low fat yogurts, low fat cookies, low fat or no fat muffins, those sorts of things. And right around that time, we all started getting fatter, right? And we started to see this spike in chronic disease, heart disease, and diabetes, and it's because people were eating more sugar and more refined carbohydrates, right? The highly processed foods. And so, do you remember the Snackwells cookies? I think that's the one that everybody brings up. So I love carbs. Love carbs. And what I always tell my patients is it's not the quantity of the carbs, but the quality of the carbs that you're eating that matters, right? And so I, of course, still recommend a whole food, plant-based, low-fat diet. 10 to 15% of total calories should come from fat. So now to really talk about fat specifically, not all fat is created equal. There's 3 different types of fats that we're going to break down. Number 1, trans fats, 2, saturated fats, and 3, unsaturated fats. And some are better than others. And to keep in mind, the only food you can find 0 fat in truly is sugar and artificial sweeteners. Every food, including fruits and vegetables, have some level of fat in them. Most fruits and vegetables have very low amounts, but all foods have some level of fat. So I'm not saying 0 fat, but 10 to 15% of total calories. So the first fat I want to talk about is trans fats. It's found naturally in certain meats like beef and lamb and butter and milk. And trans fats undergo this process called hydrogenation. Why do they do this to the food? To make it last longer. It increases the shelf life of foods. So 10 years ago, the FDA actually cracked down and said trans fats are terrible. It's leading to heart disease, which is absolutely true. So they actually banned them and said they're unsafe. We shouldn't be eating them. And so that said, the food industry got a little bit snide, I guess I would say. And as long as there's less than 0.5 grams of trans fats, they can say they're trans fat free. So essentially what they do on the label instead is say they have hydrogenated oils, and that's a trans fat. So you can still find trans fats out there, right? They're still in microwave popcorn, some cookies, cakes, creamers, even non-dairy creamers. So reading the label for hydrogenation or partially hydrogenated and eliminating that from your diet, it's going to be a good idea, because trans fats are bad. They increase our LDL, decrease our HDL, increase vascular inflammation, and accelerate the development of plaque in our arteries. And so a simple way to eliminate these is to eliminate the packaged, processed, ultra-processed foods, okay? And look at those labels for that label, hydrogenation, okay? The second type of fat I want to talk about is saturated fat. So these are also problematic fats. They are abundant in meat and dairy. So all meats, including poultry, fish, shellfish, and dairy, all have a lot of saturated fats. There are some plant foods that have saturated fats, including avocado and nuts and seeds. And then also, and those are the healthier forms, avocado and nuts and seeds, but there's very unhealthy plant foods too that also have saturated fat, coconut oil and palm oil, and cocoa butter. And so coconut oil is solid at room temperature, right? So that tells you it's a saturated fat. So what's wrong with saturated fats? It also increases your LDL hugely, and also increases your risk of heart disease, and what happens with all this fat in your body is it migrates to the liver, migrates to the muscles, and the muscle tissue, as well as the fat tissue, makes us fatter, but it increases the risk of fatty liver disease and insulin resistance, because when you have this insulin that cannot get into the muscle or the liver to metabolize, increases glucose, and you can increase your risk of type 2 diabetes. When I was in college, I went vegetarian because not knowing really the health benefits of a plant-based diet. So I was like, well, I'm going to just eliminate meat. So I eliminated meat, but instead I replaced it with lots of cheese and pasta with butter and all that. My diet was so high in saturated fat, and I was like, why am I not losing weight? Because I went vegetarian, of course, but I was eating really unhealthy. So that said, eliminating meat and dairy is a huge way to reduce this out of your diet, and as well as looking for those oils in your foods, especially palm oil, coconut oil. And if you think about the keto diet, for example, remember I said a whole food plant-based diet would like to go between 10 and 15% of all total calories coming from fat. The keto diet is 55 to 60% fat. People love it that are on it. Why? Because yes, you lose weight in the short term. But that said, they're mortgaging their health. So it increases the risk of chronic disease and decreases longevity. The science says that. So I don't recommend that at all. So that's our second type of fat, is saturated fats. The last type of fat is unsaturated fats. Now, you probably have heard monounsaturated, polyunsaturated. Those are unsaturated fats. Now, you might have heard people say these are healthy fats. And that's really more of a pop science term. It's not a medical term. But there's really no such thing as a healthy fat necessarily. There are healthier fats. So I always say, people will say often, like, isn't olive oil healthy? And I'll say, well, it depends on what you're comparing it to. So if you're comparing it to butter, or if you're comparing it to coconut oil, absolutely, it's healthier than those, but it still doesn't make it healthy. It's still 100% fat, and there's no fiber. So I always eat the olives, just put aside the olive oil or the oils if you can, and eat whole foods, because you're going to get plenty of fat just in whole foods. Remember, there's whether it's quinoa, rice, carrots, whatever, all of it has some level of fat. Some have more than others, like nuts and seeds have higher levels of fat. So if you are trying to lose weight, you want to make sure you're not eating too much of those, because they do have more fat, including some saturated fat. So one serving of nuts a day is what Dr. Greger recommends on his Daily Dozen. 1 tablespoon of flaxseed, or 2 tablespoons of nut butters a day instead of 1 serving. That's essentially what you should have in a day. So anyway, thanks for listening. I just want to go quickly through my 3 takeaways from this. Number 1, keep Total fat calories between 10 and 15% of daily calories of fat. If you're trying to lose weight, maybe a little less than that. If you're trying to gain weight, maybe a little more than that. But 10 to 15% of total daily calorie intake should come from fat. 2, check labels for that hydrogenation process. So hydrogenated oils, partially hydrogenated oils. 3, eat a plant-forward diet or a whole food plant-based diet. That's really the best way to prevent or reverse chronic disease, type 2 diabetes, heart disease. And if you want more information or you want a free consult, please reach out to me. I'm happy to chat with you offline. But I hope you guys have a great February, great Heart Month, and have a great weekend.